So I thought I would start by reading you a poem all about a day in the life of a lavender plant, seeing as we're sitting in amongst all this lovely lavender. And it's called Rising Through Stars. 6 a.m. lavender flower, rising through stars, notices a fox, nodding as it passes, recognising the earth, willing itself up from soil. 10 a.m. lavender bee flower, tickled by the haired feet of a red-tailed bumble, supping sugar water from the little sucking mouths of buds, gratifying itcher. 11:30 a.m. lavender swaying in the kissing breeze, little alarmed spear, waves and swings in the pursed wind, spilling grains. 2 p.m. spike flower opening a bud, unlatching petal lips, pushing from within, forcing another purple flower, one more little mouth open, coaxing nectar, come on, open. 8 p.m. little purple lavender, poor thing, been too long unrained on, taproot drilling earth, seeking cloud scat, thirsting, yellowed out. Midnight, black lavender in satin light, breathing out spice, bruise-smitten ant saunters glittering up the stem, pausing at the leaf joints to drink. 6 a.m. lavender rising through stars, cold by the warm clouds fleeting across the moon, letting dust drift, willing itself up from soil, notices a fox.
Can you remember the very first time you felt an urge to write?
Oh, the very first time I felt an urge to write, I think it was in my DNA. I think I've always been a writer. Right from being in primary school, I was writing stories and trying to put words together in unusual ways and trying to describe, you kind of would look at something and go, how would I describe that? What words would I use that would perfectly describe that thing? So I feel like that was very, very early for me, but I didn't realise that was poetry until until I was into my 30s and did a course. I went to Swansea Uni Adult Education Department just after I had my first daughter, so that my mum could she just wanted to look after my daughter and have time with the baby. So I ended up, there's dogs coming. Hello, hi, hello. Hello! That was cute. So I went to an adult education class and it was for short stories because I really liked long form. I liked writing stories and I'd done a bit of that. I did a novel writing MA as soon as I graduated. I went up to Manchester and did that. And so I was always much more interested in long form, but then life took over and I ended up going into journalism. So I kind of discovered poetry at quite a late point in my life, I guess, but became entirely addicted to it. And maybe because I'm a mum and you kind of almost have to have these concentrated bursts of time where you work on something. Certainly for me anyway, I found that... Are all those dogs barking okay? It's fine, okay. I just found that really a much easier way for me to write something and get a whole idea down, a whole piece of work down in a really short space of time in between doing other things and having a day job and having kids. So for me, poetry works really well, but I love it as an art form as well. It's that idea. For me, it's about getting almost like a painting. You're trying to paint with words. You're trying to paint a feeling, you're trying to describe a feeling. You're trying to put your reader exactly where you were or where you want them to be, to feel that feeling or to go along with you on that journey, on that story. But you can tell a story in in 100 words or 200 words just by using punctuation or spaces on the page, or it's a really spare way of storytelling. So I absolutely love writing poems. So the title poem from my collection is called The Language of Bees. And I wrote it while I was tending to my lavender. And the lavender patch that I had before was right on the edge of a field, and it had Roman vines in it. And it kind of got me thinking about where we've come from and where we are now and where we're going next, and kind of this fear of climate change and what will happen next. And what archaeology will be there from us in future generations. It's called It Took Too Long to Learn the Language of Bees. But in a field, sitting among dandelion, nettle, bramble, lavender, I began to fathom it. I had been agreeing with the general sounds of the meadow, the crunch of vegetation and the clicks of small feet on soil, and the throats of birds flung open to let out blue. Meanwhile, bees called by, knocking into dock leaves, humming and dusting themselves with pollen, going about their seed pearl work. And I, kneeling, untethered weeds from around the crop, as if lovingly unbuttoning the earth's shirt, thought how 2,000 years ago Romans would have heard these same sounds, stood on this same warm rise, smelled this ancient lavender on their skin, heard these bees, or not these bees, but bees, and called apis, how they would have dripped honey on hard bread as they clipped coins to give change in the time of Emperor Constantine, discarding their chipped vases for us to find. And then at my shoulder, as if someone had read aloud a glossary, I found I knew the words spoken by this hive-born voice, that here was more than a simple dash to join the dots between flowers, but Morse code, an SOS, the bass clef come to life, a lisping alarm dragging through air that was, after all, much too hot. I understood as they came fussing about my head like lost words, their pollen baskets yellow and full, wanting to seal this heat in wax for a long winter. They worried about who might survive this nicotined field to find my old secateurs, scrape clean my dirty coins, discover the shape my knees once pressed into furrows.
If you could tell me a little bit about your love for bees, please.
A little bit about my love for bees. Where do I begin? I suppose, having read a lot about climate change, I think it starts there. It starts with worrying about what's happening to the planet and reading lots of news stories. I'm a bit of a news junkie anyway as a journalist, so reading lots of news about kind of the catastrophic collapse of insect populations, or what will we do if we don't have bees anymore. Those kind of bigger problems led me to kind of think a bit more about the bees in my own garden and in my own life, you know, because we do have them all around us, don't we? And we sort of ignore them really, but I think learning to identify them, I bought one of those bee spotter guides and I learnt all the different kinds of bumblebee so that I could identify them, because I'm a bit of a geek like that. So, but then being able to identify different ones, it makes you feel closer to them when you go, oh, that's a red-tailed bumblebee, or that's a tree bumblebee, or that I can tell the difference between a bumblebee and a honeybee, or just that basic level of knowledge brings you closer to your subject, I think. And then there was a particular moment, and the other thing I suppose is lavender. You know, if you're working amongst lavender and weeding it and you've kind of down in the plants, you end up with bees around your head. Hello, bee. And they're quite curious and they want to see you and get to know what you are and figure out if you're a flower or not, and can you give them food or not. So all of that stuff, it's just a joy to be around them. I told you this earlier, Taz, I've never been stung by a bee, touch wood. So I feel very comfortable around them, and I just find that they're sort of quite comical in a way. They just sort of bumble about and they fall into things. And when we were harvesting the lavender, the first year we harvested it, I remember kind of you grab the stems and then you cut, and coming around and feeling a little tiny vibration in the flowers, and there was a bee asleep on the lavender. So in just sort of very tenderly laying it back down and making sure that it was okay, you become almost sympathetic with your, I was going to say workmates, and I feel a bit like they kind of work alongside me when I'm in the lavender. So that's one of the reasons. But then there was a particular moment where I came home one day from work, having come on the train, and all the news was kind of full of the insect population collapse and how, you know, insect populations were going down and down, and in 50 years we won't have any left, and what's that going to mean for us. And then I got home and there was a common carder bee, which is a type of bumblebee, on my driveway, sort of looking very sorry for itself and not moving. And my kids really love, you know, all that kind of let's save the bee stuff. So we ended up going getting some sugar water and trying to save the bee, and we put it in a little takeaway box and we brought it into the house and we tried to give it the sugar water, and it did end up not making it. But I had this sort of connection with this bee, and it made me look at bee life cycles and kind of how bees survive the winter and all of those kind of special, amazing things that they can do. I don't think I'll ever run out of being fascinated by bees and the way they live and the way we need them, how urgently we need them, because we won't have any food or plants if we don't save them. And not just honeybees, people kind of have this idea that you have to have honeybees in order to, let's get a beehive then and save the world. But actually our native bumblebees do a really, really important job, and we don't necessarily think about them. We just assume they're okay. And when we think of bees, we think honeybees. They're all really important. And so are wasps, moths, butterflies, grasshoppers. There's a whole range, bats even, there's a whole range of small beasts that pollinate our plants, and we need them all, and we need to plant more sympathetically for them as well and let the weeds grow. The weeds are there because they need the bees and the bees need them too, so we should open our eyes a bit more to what's around us, in my view. So when I was researching this book, I discovered an amazing fact about bees, which is that a certain frequency produces a certain effect. So it's called sonication, and what the bee does is it goes and it vibrates at a particular musical note inside the flower, and then the flower gives up its pollen. Some people call it floral sonication, and this poem is called Sonication. I am more than you. I am a musical note. My body makes the colour of a middle sea. Flowers clutch their pollen tight as pearls, but my thorax, abdomen, hind legs, forewings, mandibles, antennae, tongue, together transform, hum, and then I become a trembling, vibrating, perfect note, sonicating. My body is diva, and when I hit my note, they throw flowers, drench their pearls down my back.
The natural world has a distinctive place in your poems. I'd love to know more about how nature shapes your poetry.
I think probably I've answered some of that in talking about bees, but I think I'm just endlessly fascinated by the wonders of the natural world, and not even the exotic creatures, because actually the more climate change affects the world around us, the more actually these creatures that we used to once take for granted are becoming quite rare. So just even seeing a butterfly is an unusual event now, never mind identifying lots of different species. So, and I've really noticed that this year, that there aren't so many around. You just aren't seeing the number of individuals that maybe you used to see. So I think even just the sort of mundane things like the crow or the jackdaw or the robin or the wren, or those things that are almost sort of commonplace, or were once, sparrows even, just being able to identify that there are two different kinds of sparrows and the males and the females look different from each other, and just kind of having a bird feeder in our garden and seeing what visits and then identifying it and being close to it. I think that just gives me such joy. There's more background noise again, Taz. But I just find it gets my creative juices flowing as well. I think being out and about in nature, thinking about even being on a train and looking out the window and wondering about trees is enough to spark up a poem and an idea. So in the shade of this beautiful tree, I thought I might read you a poem called Wood Thinking, and you have to turn the collection on its side for this one because we couldn't fit it onto one page, but it's in the shape of a tree. I don't know if you can see that, viewers at home, but you have to buy the collection in order to see it. So this is called Wood Thinking. Once you understand that trees are earthed on a tipped compass, that air is the water where they dip their toes, you can know how a wood thinks, not through the breath exhaled from wooden lungs, but as a creature stirring in the earth beneath, a steady intention of intellect bound into a great root ball, electric impulses of soil, fibrous earth as a medium of thought. You can listen to ancient knowings, listen, for the creek begins there, where the tree first uncurled from its gleaming seed and turned 2 ways, there, in the small songs of the sap rising, an oak clockwork set to the round ringing ribboning of seasons, pushing up numberless clinker-built ribs that rise and clasp and rise. But also from this dark fist of roots, branch wires drill down, vertebrate, the tree's nerves, the tympan straining, a long ear horned into the ground, attending feverishly to the earth's mutter. Listen, nonsense and secrets, the world scrabbling and worming, lousing to itself. Why has nobody thought to change the words for where a tree thinks? For there is no electric beat at the head, in the wind rustle of the green leaf crown, in the heartwood of the trunk, nor in the muscles of the leaning limbs. Wood thinking is a brain in soil. It is there, deep in those thrilling roots, where the whole wood gathers itself to listen and marvel at the shuffle of worms.
Who are the poets and writers who have influenced you or inspired you?
Well, as I say, I came to poetry quite late in life. I was a really big lover of Thomas Hardy and his poetry as well as his novel writing, but I think his novels are just extended poems really. The way he uses language is beautiful. So I would say that was an early influence. And then I think there was a big moment. I wrote poetry for a few years, and then we went off on a family holiday on a narrowboat, which was hideous in some ways because it was cold, and we took the kids off on this idea of this romantic river-based or canal-based holiday, and actually it was pretty challenging stuff. We went up to Yorkshire and it was cold and miserable, and the kids just sat under their duvets the whole time, and there wasn't the wildlife we'd hoped to see, and so it was all a bit challenging. But we went to Saltaire, which has an old mill in it with a beautiful bookshop and lots of art, which was kind of the highlight of the trip for me. And I picked up an Alice Oswald book, and I'd never read any of her poetry before, and I picked it up off the shelf and I read The Body, which is her poem about the dead badger, and something kind of just went, there was a sort of a fireworks in my brain when I read that, and I just went, oh, you can write poetry like this. And it was full of repetition and quite sort of Anglo-Saxon words in a way, quite plain language choices, but used in so many unusual ways, and I mean lots of complicated words as well, but just the way she joins concepts together, something went in my brain, and I just thought, wow, this is okay, you can write like this. And so that started a whole journey for me, really. So she's probably my biggest influence. All I have to do, if I'm really short of time and I need to write something, because it's my poetry class tomorrow and I've really got to write something today, I just pick up an Alice Oswald book and I just will read a couple, even just a line will make me go, oh yes, okay, I'm in the zone, and then off I go again. So I find her really inspiring. There are lots of other poets that I love. I think, well, especially in the language of bees territory, I was reading Sylvia Plath. She wrote beautiful poems about bees and about her inner world. So that was really inspiring. I read a lot of Sean Borrowdale. He's written a book called Bee Journal, which is about his life as a beekeeper, but there's some beautiful stuff in that. So that was beautiful. Gillian Clark, I read a little. Carol Ann Duffy obviously has written about bees as well. So I kind of did a whole reading around, doing my literature review. Of all the kind of bee poets that I could find, certainly the modern ones. I like Ted Hughes' stuff. I know perhaps that comes with a lot of baggage as well. I don't know if you're allowed to say you like Ted Hughes anymore. But I think his nature poetry and his outdoor and his farming kind of background appeals to me, and the way he puts words together is beautiful. Seamus Heaney as well, of course. Is that enough? Is that a good list?
I was going to say that I really enjoyed Alice Oswald's Dart, and
Yes.
I had a copy with me for the entirety of the pandemic, and I did exactly the same. But every time I'd get stuck, I'd just go back to
She's just amazing. Dart is beautiful. There's an image where she's talking about the plants, the reeds growing as if they're straws sucking up from the dead underneath the river. I just love the way she sees everyday things and transforms them into something that just kind of almost shifts your perspective upside down. You think, oh, I never thought about it like that. Also, every time I see a cloud of midges, I always think a controversy of midges, because that's in one of her poems, and I just think, how do you do it? Or there's an image of a dandelion as well in one of her poems, where it's kind of almost being thoughts are being pulled out of its head. I just think she's so clever. I wish I could write like Alice Oswald. So this next poem is about a time when, as a student, I ended up in France, and we got stranded in this town in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know where it was to this day. And we sort of went out wandering, looking for something to eat, and moths started to fall from the sky. There was this incredible sort of snowstorm of moths. I've never seen anything like it. And they were just sort of falling like snow, and apparently it was to do with their mating, and the males and females will mate, and then the males fall to the ground and die. And there's something very tragic about that, isn't there? But when I was researching moths and looking at collective nouns for moths, I discovered that the collective noun for moths is a whisper of moths, and I thought that was too wonderful to waste, so I've used it in this poem. This poem is called Whispers, and it's also all about unrequited love. In France, before you loved me, it was summer, and a strange blizzard fell. Pale moths, each unique as a snowflake, flurried in whispers from darkness, until the pavements grew white beneath their paper bodies, and cars slowed with their windscreen wipers flailing against the ultrasonic ecstasy of sky, rubbing up against sky. It was an ash squall, a mating storm, electric, everything sheathed beneath a skin of moths. We sat at a small table on the Bridge Cafe with side plates of sweet fig tart, coffee, watching moths perform their final act of love and fall from the sky's black mouth, thickening the lamplight, glancing down our naked shoulders to the street before slipping into the black river. And in the tumult I waited to see if you would kiss me. The kiss came in its own shape. A single moth swooned against my lips, a fingertips brush, while you looked the other way, over the water, thought of something else. I found my mouth had been winged, stunned, altered by the sky's dying touch. It was the waiter who noticed and opened the parasol to stop the bodies falling onto the crumbed moons of our plates.
Are you working on anything at present?
I'm starting. It's quite difficult when you've had a workout, because I've spent a long time perfecting, editing, going over and over and over, and so it makes you really scared to put any words down on the page, because they're not going to be at that level, are they? But I need to get over that. But I am writing. As I said, I've got this regular monthly poetry group that I go to, and we always write something, so that keeps me going. That sort of, even though it's one a month, that's good. It keeps my hand in. So I have got an idea for the next collection and where I want to take it. I think I don't want to talk too much about what that's going to be, because almost naming it takes all the creative energy out of it. So I'm still thinking about it, and maybe I'll end up going in a different direction, but I think I've got some work that I've already produced that would fit in with it, and it's definitely going to be climatey. It's definitely going to take, this is sort of the jumping off point. I want it to be much more, I don't know. I think maybe this is quite careful in a way. This is quite a, it's a sort of hymn to the natural world that I love, and I want to be a bit more controversial or a bit more in your face with the next one. For me, that may not be according to everybody else, but I feel to me that it will be more in your face and a bit more like, we need to do something about this, because it's really, really big, important issue, and why are we not doing more about it now? We need to act now. We needed to act 20 years ago. You know, time's running out. Gaslight. Not long after you arrived, we lay swaddled together in bed, you and I, our bodies small on the corner of the sheet, like two buildings marked on a map. You were sucking on my milk, sanding against me with the love of your tongue, breaking the barrier of skin between us. You couldn't have got closer, your living system jacked into mine. You sucked until I bled, and my breasts thickened, clotted, turned hard, and your little sucking breaths, their over and over again beat, became the only sound I could hear, until I looked down and found that the walls had fallen away. Above and all around I saw the night sky in its terrifying glory, each cold, unreachable star flickering, as if the gaslight glow powering each one was altered by some process far out of my understanding. The pulse that passed between us was the sound of the whole universe. I was only alive to keep you alive, an overheating boiler, my life's manual already written, unalterable. I saw the trick that had been played. Joy, curiosity, work, study, being a good person, none of these mattered at all. Only you, breathing in, breathing out, my life for yours. And that is how it was, how it went on, until someone came into the room and flicked on the lights.